Rebecca George of Mojave Wines, it is an absolute honor to have you here today on the Mr. Wine Guy podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's awesome for a lot of reasons. For one, I want to shout out Roy Piper. I've talked with you about this offline a few times, but Roy Piper is the reason for this interview today. And Roy's one of those guys. I always joke about how he's super smart and analytical, but not because he's smart and analytical. It's just that he's so over the top. He's such a wizard when it comes to information and winemaking and just relationships. And I always felt like if I'm on a deserted island and I need somebody there who's going to be the logistical guy and also make the wine,
Yeah.
it's going to be Roy
Right.
Piper. So shout
Right.
out to Roy Piper, super cool
Yeah.
guy. But I also wanted to talk about how honored I am to have you on the podcast today. And one of the things that's really striking to me more than anything, as I've done my research and gotten to know a lot about you, I think what makes you so special is your willingness to specifically go after what you want. And I say that because I think a lot of times in the wine industry, or not even just the wine industry, but in general, when people are pursuing their passions or pursuing their goals, I feel like people are taking advantage of that step that's in front of them. And with
Mhm.
you, I think what you did was you curated your path. You really chose specifically on how you were going to reach your success and your goals. And man, you've done it so incredible. You've done it with the people that you've met, that you've had as mentors. You're now a mentor. You're one of those people that in 20 years, people are going to be talking about how they have Rebecca George and they got to learn from
Mhm.
you and you were consulting them. I can see all these things down the road. And aside from your wines and the incredible wines that you've made for different houses and been a part of different houses,
Mhm.
I think what makes you so special is the fact that you chose this path. You specifically chose how you were going to go about your time in the wine industry. And that's inspiring. I think a lot of people that are listening today, they'll really find a lot of value in that. And if there's something that somebody wants, they need to specifically go after that because you are a true example of that. And so shout out to Roy, shout out to you. And I'm just excited to have you here today. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. I'm glad it looks that way. I'm not sure that it always has felt that way. No, it's in all honesty, it's been a great career. It's been a great path. And oftentimes it has been very intentional, but other times it's been more of just like opportunities that were presented to me at the time. But certainly with Mojave, that has been and continues to be intentional. But that's not to say that there haven't been moments when I've questioned that whole project too, because it's a lot of work.
Oh, yeah. I know your story. I don't want to jump ahead real quick, but I wanted to
Yeah.
start a little bit about your journey as a kid. But I know that
Yeah.
you have a family member that was almost responsible for who you are today and the Rebecca George that we know today. But before we talk about that, let's
Mhm.
talk a little bit about your time growing up. You grew up in the Mojave Desert, and shout out to the name of your
Yeah.
brand, Mojave Wines. And you grew up around canyons. The landscape was much different when you were growing up than it is today. And you didn't come from a family of wine. So talk about
Yeah.
that experience outdoors, all the things that you loved about being surrounded with your home. And how do you think that translated over to your love and passion for the outdoors that you now call today in the wine industry?
Yeah. So I grew up in a small city called Ridgecrest, which is out in the middle of the Mojave Desert. The closest big town is about an hour and a half away. So there's not a lot to do out there. And one thing that we did do a lot of, and with my father, because he grew up also out in that area and spent a lot of time hunting birds and hunting deer in just the Sierras in that area. So spending a lot of time outdoors, big appreciation for just being outside and camping and fishing and hiking and all that stuff. So when I was growing up, that's also what he and I did together was take a 4x4 pickup truck out into the desert and go check out wildflowers and lizards and things like that. Or oftentimes it was going up into the canyons at the base of the Eastern Sierras there, which I don't know if many people have been to the Eastern Sierras, but it's just an incredible part of California
Yeah.
that's a little bit hidden away. But that's really my stomping grounds. And so growing up, I just always had a love for just nature, being outside and exploring these different areas. And I think going forward for me, that's just translated into still being able to be outside, but having this work experience that is more hands-on and I would say diverse. Obviously in vineyards, you're constantly outside, whether it's sampling or just walking the vineyards to check the grapevines throughout the season. But I love that this career provides that, and that we can be in so many different types of terroirs and areas, from whether it's Malviter here in
Yeah.
Napa Valley or Sonoma Coast or Anderson Valley, Santa Cruz. These are all, for me, just very incredibly beautiful places and places that I love to be in. So it's nice that it's not an office job or solely working in a lab where you're inside all day doing one thing. That's
Yeah.
really one thing that I love about winemaking is it's every day is a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think it's great you talk about Napa and you actually are a part of a project that makes totally different wines than what you make with your
Mhm.
personal brand, which we'll talk about later. But you have a love and appreciation for the vineyards, you have a love and appreciation for outdoors. And I think it was just natural for you to fall into place the way that you did at UC Davis. And so you got your viticulture and enology degree at UC Davis
Mhm.
2005. But when you went to UC
Mhm.
Davis, you were not following a career path or a pursuit in wine. You were actually going for a bioscience degree, if I'm not mistaken. And if it
Mhm.
wasn't for a particular family member, we may not even
Right.
know the Rebecca George today because this person actually inspired you to take advantage of the opportunities at UC Davis. Talk a little bit about that and what was your original goal when you were going to school for bioscience?
That person, funny enough, her name is also Rebecca George. So she's my stepmother. And she is originally from my hometown, but she spent probably around 25 years in Sonoma County and also a little bit in Napa County as well. And so she had friends that were in the wine industry, other winemakers, and was very just familiar with the wine industry in general. And I think
Mhm.
also just living in Sonoma County, it's like you're so exposed to the food and wine culture. So when
Totally.
she came back down and met my father and they started a relationship, obviously I became close to her as well. And really, she introduced me to a little bit of cooking. Like she was making pestos from scratch. And these
Oh,
are
nice.
these types of things which I just hadn't really been exposed to before. And she was the one that said, like, when I was applying for colleges and trying to figure out where to go, Davis was one of the colleges that I applied to. We visited it, and she was like, it'd be worth considering checking out the wine industry because has it contains a lot of things that you enjoy, like being outdoors, biology, sciences,
Mhm.
kind of history and culture. And so she really was the inspiration or the person that gave me that idea to pursue it.
Do you think that she was vicariously living through you? Because it sounds like her passion for wine was spilling out on you. Would you agree with that in a little way?
Maybe a little bit. Maybe a little bit. Probably looking back, she probably thought, oh, that might have been a good path for me. But no, I think she's also just a good sort of judge of character and saw that it could be a good fit.
Yeah.
And yeah. And so I took that freshman year of college at Davis. I was still exploratory. I didn't know what I was going to do. I figured it would be biological sciences or maybe environmental sciences. I was interested in forestry, going back to that just love of environmental things. But I took an intro to winemaking course with Dr. Andy Waterhouse. Really just enjoyed it so much that I then decided to do a little internship in Dr. Ann Noble's lab in her sensory lab. So
Yeah.
when I say internship, it wasn't really it's
Oh,
like
yeah.
preparing. It was preparing samples for the grad students or for the actual B&E students for their tastings. But at that point, then I was really starting to become immersed in this wine program. And so after that, my sophomore year, I took off the fall quarter and worked a harvest here in Carneros,
So
Napa Valley.
I have a couple of questions. So
Yeah, please.
my first question is, did you realize at that time that the science was very much about winemaking? Did you obviously know that ahead of time? And were you like, wow, I could actually see myself doing both things. I could be in the outdoors. I could be doing something that seems very
Mhm,
passion driven, very food related. And also I could be practicing, what I wanted to pursue, which was science. And
mhm.
also, after that, my other question was, I think it's actually really cool that you went to Artesa to work a harvest because you wanted to have that experience. Did somebody inspire you to go out there and work to see if you would enjoy it before you pursued it when in university, or was this just a decision that you made?
I don't really remember. That was probably partly Rebecca as well, because I didn't know. I was 19 years old and you can't
Yeah.
even not even old enough to drink, and I have no idea. So it was a good test because I had taken tours with my parents around different wineries and like walking through the cellar, all this loud noises, heavy equipment of what's going on.
Right.
So I did want to just get my feet wet and figure out, okay, let me just try it on and see if it's something I enjoy or if I hate it. And because it's still early enough in my college career that I can pivot to something else.
Yeah, and the science was sorry, I didn't mean to hit you up with
Oh
2
yeah.
questions back to back, but the
Yeah.
science
Yeah.
definitely was probably encouraging to you, right?
Yeah, so the science part piece, especially the biology and microbiology part, was the most interesting to me. I think at that point, I didn't realize how heavy the chemistry was going to
Yeah,
be for the B&E degree,
yeah,
and that is something that does not come naturally to me. Is and the same thing could be said for like calculus and all of the math that you have to do as well. But I made it through. I remember talking to one of the grad students I was working with in Dr. Noble's lab, and I was just telling her like, I don't know if I don't know if I can make it. I don't know if I can get through these
mhm,
chemistry courses. And she's just stay the course. You don't have to be perfect. Just pass the classes and get to the next level. So I
yeah,
did. So I took some tutoring courses that helped me just get through like whatever, all of it, general chemistry, organic chemistry, biochemistry.
yeah.
I had to get help through all of it, but I made it.
Wow, that's encouraging though, like, you and clearly one of the things about the wine industry is there's always people there that are gonna encourage you, and I think you knew you had it within you. I can actually relate, like, I do not like math and chemistry, and I hate to say it, I'm not crazy about science as well, so
Mhm.
when these things are presented to me, and especially in a classroom setting, like, I'm repelling it, like, I would rather go on the job,
Yeah.
learn, and do it that way, but it's cool because you had people there, that were encouraging you, whether it was your stepmom or whether it was this person, and especially too in the industry, you're always gonna have people that are gonna encourage you, and I'm curious when you
Hmm.
were at Artesa, was there something that kind of reconvinced you, or was there something that stood out about working that harvest that confirmed for you, "Yes, this is definitely something that I wanna get into?"
I think there I really just liked kind of the energy of harvest. And also I realized that I was running the white press. Like it's funny to think about it now that a winemaker or assistant winemaker would let this 20-year-old who knows nothing about wine like actually run the white press. Um, and I remember one day Don Van Staveren, who was the winemaker at the time, like said, "Oh, you're the superstar intern." And it was just like, oh my gosh. Like,
That's cool.
this was so cool. They actually think I'm doing a good job. But at the time as well, I met my friend Stefan Vivier. So they had did a little bit of custom crush there. So he was
Mhm.
working for HDB at the time. And so just seeing kind of his process, learning from him, just the whole experience. It was all brand new to me. When I walked in and the assistant winemaker was trying to teach me how to use a pump, he had to draw me a picture because I just was not getting
Wow.
the concept of like how a pump works and what we're going to do. So he was really an incredible first teacher for me in the cellar because he just went over all the basics super thoroughly. And it was a great foundation for me for
Well, when
working in cellar.
I can relate too because when I worked harvest, I was in my late 30s, and I was
Yeah.
so overwhelmed, and I think that
Right.
I also felt the pressure of the price point of the wines. I hate to say it,
Oh
but
God. Yes.
I'm in
Yes.
there and I'm working and I'm touching the barrels and I'm doing all these different things and I'm helping doing pump overs and I'm doing all the grunt work and all that stuff, which obviously if you're gonna be in the wine industry, you gotta love that kind of stuff. But I remember
Yeah.
thinking like, I know what I'm doing, but I have never done this before and have 4 or $500 bottles of wine that are gonna be shipped out, and in 3 or 4 years, that representation is gonna I feel the pressure, and I'm not even the winemaker. I can totally relate.
Yeah, and I think, in fact, one of the custom crush winemakers at the time during that experiment or experience had said, I think I spilled a little bit of juice on the ground or something, and he said, "It's like money on the floor. What are you doing?" And it was actually good for me to hear that at that point in my career to be like, "Oh, you're right. Okay, I see." It's just it's
They also
invaluable.
saw I think they saw something in you, though. I think that the reason why you were being trusted, the way that you felt like, wow, you were thrown off, I think that you shouldn't have been thrown off. Maybe you know that now,
Hmm.
but it's because you
Hmm.
were so passionate, you were so into what you were doing. And I think that they saw something much more than just this new kid on the block that was trying to figure out whether or not you wanted to do this for the rest of your life. And I know you went on
Yeah.
to work on your undergraduate in the University of Adelaide. And
Yeah.
when you were traveling, you also went over to France and you stumbled upon
Hmm.
a tasting at DRC. So,
Hmm.
first of all, explain a little bit about DRC for those that aren't aware. And this was almost, I guess it shouldn't have happened, but it did. And you found yourself tasting at DRC. So, talk about how amazing
Hmm.
this was and how this had an influence on your progress
Hmm.
as you continued to move forward.
Hmm. Yeah. So DRC is Domaine de la Romanée Conti, which is the most famous domain in Burgundy in the town of Bon Romanée, with obviously all these incredible Grand Cru vineyards. And I had the opportunity to taste with, which is incredible. I think at the time, I don't know if I've told this story before, but at the time I knew it was an important place, an important winery, but I didn't really understand the significance of these
Yeah.
wines. And I was, gosh, I don't know, 21, 22 or something. And we're tasting with Aubert, which is really incredible. Like it's people now that can't even Psalms that have been working with Psalms for years that
Mhm.
can't get invited. So I was totally spoiled. And I was tasting, I think it was a Monarchet. And I've been taught to you taste and then you spit. And I guess he said to my friend, like, oh, she doesn't know that you shouldn't spit. You shouldn't spit this out.
Oh,
Just tasting those caliber of wines at that young age in some ways is a bit of a shame because I think I just didn't at the time have the sort of the respect or understanding of how incredible this opportunity is.
when you were tasting these wines, did they give you such a broad example of different years, different vintages? Because you can't taste those wines and taste them just 10 years old. You have to go back and you have to
Mhm,
taste
right.
from long ago and really see what those wines have done over the years. How was that lineup?
At the time is I don't think we were tasting that many back vintages. I think we were actually barrel
Oh, okay.
tasting.
Got it. Got it.
So other than I believe the Montrachet with an older bottle.
Right.
So I didn't really get that perspective. I don't think I really understood that perspective until later in my career. But obviously, these are wines that need to be aged and enjoyed at a later time.
Totally. Looking at your internships, you'd already done one internship and now you're in Burgundy and you get a special invitation to be a part of this premier Grand Cru house, really high end Burgundian wines. And
Mhm.
this is in 2005, I believe. But I think one of the
Mhm.
best parts about this experience was your time that you spent in the vineyards. And I think this is where you really
Mhm.
got a chance to really learn and love and appreciate. And this is in the
Mhm.
heart of Bon Romanée. So this is like right there where you're really getting into the action. So talk
Yeah.
about what it was like to get this invitation, to be able to work this harvest, and
Mhm.
also to
Mhm.
spend that summer in the vineyards.
Yeah. And it wasn't quite an invitation. I worked hard. That was a fellowship that I received through this partnership between the Confrérie des Chevaliers du Tetseval in Burgundy and
Yeah,
UC Davis. There used to be an exchange between the two universities, and French students would come to America and work. But now I think it's only one way. But that was something that I really wanted to do. So I worked hard to get that fellowship. I like put my entire itinerary in French. I wrote my entire essay in French. So yes, it was awarded to me. It wasn't like just an invitation. Oh, you're special. It was like I worked hard to get that.
yeah,
But then yes, going over there, God, it was such a formative experience in my career because I had been taking university French, but I didn't have, you really don't get it until you're there immersed in
right.
it. And so the first month of being there, we were working in the vineyards, just doing leafing and tucking. And then towards the end of that, doing fruit thinning. And so like this first couple of weeks, I just remember like basically not saying anything and just listening. And then
Totally.
slowly like the language was really coming to me. But it was truly incredible just to be in these historic vineyards, and they're different there. They're shorter, like the vine, they're shorter, so you spend a lot of time like bent over. Obviously, the rows are more kind of high
Yeah.
density, so closer together. But it was just incredible to be in these sites and recognize that there's just a lot of handwork that goes into the grapes, and that if you're doing all of the work, the good work on the grapevines during the season, and you have a great site, that makes the winemaking much easier once the grapes are in the winery. But it was challenging. I remember doing fruit thinning for like enrich or in Coparentu, and the owners kind of standing over me going, no, not that one, this one. And in French. And I'm like, I don't completely understand what you're trying to tell me.
Body language is,
Yeah. But and in terms of what you were talking about, the pressure of the dollar value is, oh my God, I don't want to cut off the wrong cluster.
hmm
I don't know. It was a great experience and a great lesson for 24 years old.
yeah. And I guess one of my other questions about that is I'm pretty sure that experience has really been a definition for how to really work in and view the vineyards that you make your wines today, because your wines are very much Burgundy style wines out of Sonoma. So you definitely learned something valuable. And I think you couldn't have learned from a better place.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it definitely goes back to like finding those great sites that you think are fantastic and just making sure that the fruit you're working with is stellar so that when
hmm
it does come into the winery that you're not having to mess with it too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Low intervention, let the wine do the work.
Yeah, and I think I'm listening to your Roy podcast, and I think he said something similarly. It's really about finding these incredible vineyards that makes your job much easier as a winemaker because those
Totally.
vineyards just shine through.
Absolutely. And after that experience, you went to Australia. So you're traveling, man.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
going like, you're switching hemispheres, doing all this other stuff. When you go
yeah.
to Australia, you're in the Yarra Valley. What was it like to experience making wines over there? And now you're making wines that are much different than the ones you were making in
hmm
Burgundy. Were you looking for just a broader experience or like a broader education, or were you still trying to figure out your next step?
I think it was broader experience because obviously I had just experienced something that was like a very tiny domain, high attention to detail, and just these small number of vineyards and lots to something that was much bigger. I think I
Right.
just wanted to see the other side of the industry. It's okay. Here's the small side and the like very boutique side. What does the other side look like? Which is a bit more corporate.
Yeah.
This was Yarburn was part, I think at the time it was part of PRL Hardy, which I think then went on to become Constellation.
Okay.
But it was partly just my connection to the winemaker at the time. I just chatted with him on the phone and there's certain people that you click with and you
hmm
understand. And what he wanted me to do, I thought was a good challenge, which was they were at the time they were crushing at Uring Station, which is actually a pretty well known winery in the Yarra
hmm
Valley. They were doing custom crush there, but he needed somebody that could set up just a harvest laboratory. So basically, I got there and all of the lab equipment was in boxes. There were like some folding tables. So it was also just knowing that I could complete this challenge of putting together this wine lab just for the harvest and figuring out how to do that.
Yeah.
Because I had just completed a lab internship at Schramsberg
hmm
in the previous 2 years before. So it was just a new, different type of challenge.
Yeah. And
Um,
I was gonna say, you got to work at Schramsberg and you were there for a few years. You were also at William Sellium. And so I'm feeling like at this point, you're starting to, whether it was in Burgundy or at this point now, you're really starting to see this path unfold. You're falling in line with some of the same varietals. And it's cool because there's such a rich history. Obviously, there's a huge history with Schramsberg, but you're making bubbles
mhm,
now out of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
right.
And you're also making like really nice high-end Pinot Noirs out of William Sellium. And so I'm just curious, was this kind of that time where you started to say, okay, this is literally the path that I'm going to go as far as like personally making wine is concerned? And wow, what a cool history to be a part of Strasbourg.
Yeah. Yes, after Australia, I definitely was focused on staying in the Pinot Noir Chardonnay realm. And so I came back and did that harvest with William Sellium. And then after that, I was looking for a full-time job and kind of was sending resumes out to places in Sonoma County, maybe a few places in Oregon, but I was asking the Schramsberg winemaker for a referral. And he said, we have a job opening. It was, for me, it was like, I love Schramsberg
Yeah.
and I love the wines that they make there. And it could be a great opportunity to still stay within the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay realm, but be exposed to the entire sparkling process.
Yeah.
And so that's what brought me there. And I loved my time there. For me, Schramsberg is classic Napa. It's one of the first wineries that came back in that second era of Napa,
Hmm.
like post prohibition in
Right.
the 60s. They're really one of the first wineries there. It's a beautiful spot, and they make some of California's best sparkling wine. So it was an incredible learning experience at Transfer.
Do you feel like personally you're one of those types of people, not just a winemaker, but you love these challenges? Because making bubbles is very challenging. Making Pinot Noir is one of the most challenging varietals to make in the world. And it
Mhm.
seems like you don't just do it, but you go in and no pun intended, you just crush it. Like you do such a good job at that. Are you one of these types of people that loves to put yourself in pressure situations and then you find yourself thriving and you knew it all along?
I don't think so. I think I just didn't realize that
Yeah.
these were like more pressure situations. I think I had done the internship at Schramsberg, so I just seemed, oh, okay, I'm familiar with that. It's probably not that much harder. Um, so no, I don't think that part was intentional. It was just like, I like this place. I like the people. For me, a lot of these jumps come back to relationships and networking, different opportunities.
It's funny. My wife used to own a clothing brand. And
Uh-huh.
real quick short story. We were in New York and we were cold calling. We had an appointment with a big cycle company that was, where were they out of? They were out of Tribeca.
Mhm.
And so we're like, you know what? We're going to take advantage of the time. So we've got a suitcase with samples and we're walking the streets and we're just like cold calling, going door to door. And we stumble upon Bergdorf Goodman. Now, this is, man, 2015 maybe? We have no idea who Bergdorf Goodman is, one of the biggest department stores in the world, right?
Yeah.
So we walk in there, we're not dressed up, we're not dressed down, but we're not, like, dressed up for the occasion. We have a suitcase that we're pulling in, and we're like, "Hey, we got these samples, and we wanna just see if anybody's interested," and they send us to this floor because we had something that worked with that, floor, and then they sent us to another floor. And then once we left, we were like, I think we were in a pretty big place. And sometimes I'm telling you that story because sometimes it's good to not know. It's good
Yeah.
to just go in and you may not have known at the time that you were working with a lot of challenging fruit. And here you are in Burgundy and you're at Schramsberg and you're doing all these incredible things. But I think it was just a passion project for you, just like it was for us. And I think that's what kind of makes it special is not knowing and just going in there and not worried about what
Going
people
for it.
think.
And I think when you're in your 20s, like, that's just more common to just go for it and not worry about consequences or
Oh yeah.
not worry about stuff. It's like the more you know is not necessarily better.
Yeah. I feel
Fears
like
get in the way.
I feel like as we get older, I feel like we unintentionally sabotage ourselves. I feel like we worry so much about what people think. We care so much about what
Yes.
people think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's sad because I saw this video the other day and this mom was like trying to like walk her kid to the edge of the diving board and just wanted her to see like what it was like because her parents were on the diving board. And the kid literally jumps off the diving board. And it's like the kid had no fear. And the mom was
Right.
freaking out and they had it on video. And sometimes I wish we would all just have that same no fear, jump off the diving board. It's not
Mhm.
going to
Yeah.
hurt. You know,
Right. It's gonna be fine.
it's going to be fine.
You'll figure it out. I think that's what I always tell myself is I'll figure it out.
Yeah, you'll figure it
But
out.
yeah, for better or worse, I think there are some times like where more planning or a more precise approach would probably be helpful. But I guess I don't know. When I think about Mojave, it's that I just jumped in.
Yeah. Another thing that you said too was like, when you think about failures, we're always so worried about the failure. But man, some of the best things I've ever learned, literally, some of the best things I've ever learned in my life were from failures.
And failure.
Like
Yeah,
literally, like even in my recent years, I've hit the wall, like face planted the wall. There's been some
totally.
experiences that like I look at them and I'm like, wow, like why did that have to happen? But then I also realized that what I know now or who I am now, or if you're working like in the wine industry, let's say you make a mistake, and I'm sure you've made a lot of mistakes, and those are testaments
Totally.
to the success that you will have moving forward. And I think that we as a society, we should stop being focused so much on the effects of the failure because there's actually more to failure, which is actually success and progress, which is down the road.
It's what is that experience here to teach you? Yeah, I
Um,
find myself constantly going like, why do I always have to learn the hard way? But you're right. There's something to be learned from those experiences. Like even when things go poorly, it's what did I learn and what will I do differently next time?
Hmm. Absolutely.
And yeah,
So in 2010, you worked as a cellar hand at Marcusson.
yeah.
Talk a little bit about Marcusson and also Helen Turley. You talk about like Icon and just like super premium wines. Talk about that
Mhm.
experience. And is there like a story about Helen Turley that you'd like to share that maybe not a lot of people know? That would be obviously good for the podcast, because she's such an icon and we could talk about her all day. But what was that like?
Yeah, Marcusson was great. I have to say, I didn't interact with Helen a ton. So
Hmm.
at the time, it was working with Matt Courtney, who was basically the winemaker there. He was there for a long time. And then it was just two other kind of cellar guys for harvest. So we were
Right.
really a small crew. But it was a great experience. That also goes back to working with incredible fruit. So they did a lot, there was a lot of attention to detail in that vineyard to the point of the grapes would come in to the winery and we really weren't doing any sorting because it was completely sorted in the vineyard. So it would all just get destemmed and go directly to tank.
Oh, that's-
Yeah. I think what I learned from there is just the value of attention to detail. So Matt Courtney and then also Helen, I think it was directed and guided by Helen,
mhm.
is really just being very careful with every little detail from they were doing basically microscope scans of every ferment just to make sure
Wow.
things looked okay from a yeast perspective. Basically, none of the barrels, like any of the barrels from the previous vintage, were almost never opened other than for topping. But beyond that, like you weren't really allowed to open them for sampling. Like all of that was sealed. And just even from a sanitation perspective, it was very clean and precise.
Mhm.
And I think there's value to that. I think you can go overboard in trying to control things to the nth degree.
Yeah.
At the time, those wines were beautiful. And like you said, they're
Mhm.
iconic wines. I guess still are iconic.
Oh, yeah. You talk about the sanitation. California is very sanitary, and
Yeah.
that's great, like you said. But is it just me, or I feel like old world wines, places that are old world, if you will, they don't use as much sanitation, but they're still like taking very good care of the process. Would you agree with that? What was it like when you were in France versus California, or when you were in Australia?
Mm.
Was it as extreme, or am I just missing something?
Um, Australia was very much similar to California in
Hmm.
terms of just New World being kind of
Yeah,
closer to those sanitation practices. Burgundy wasn't. Burgundy was cold water. They definitely were using some chemicals, but it was definitely much less stringent
hmm,
protocols. I I think it's a mix. I certainly tasted many wines from Burgundy that have Brettanomyces and they're a little bit funky, but some
hmm.
people say that adds to the character or they're okay with a little bit of Brett. It's part of the terroir.
Totally.
I think that comes back to philosophy. For me, I don't think that the Brettanomyces makes the wine better.
Mm.
That's my argument. It's not helping. Hold on one second. Sorry.
Oh wait, Steve,
Yeah, you know this
Steve,
guy.
what's up, dude? It's Mr. Wine Guy. How you been, man?
I got earpods on, so he can't hear you. But Mr.
Um,
Wine Guy is saying hi.
what's up, dude? Hey, tell him I said, man, it's good to see him whenever you get a
I
chance.
will. I will. I knew that could happen at one point. I locked
No,
I
that's
locked the
cool,
door, but
man.
Steve's got a key.
Oh, that's super cool. I saw him. I'm like, whoa, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Anyway, so
So,
Burgundy. Also, I will also say that some of the wines I think in Burgundy benefit from just naturally being at a lower pH, which gives you
mhm,
kind of natural protection microbially. So even if you're not cleaning as thoroughly as we might clean, you're not as prone to having microbial problems.
yeah.
But
So I'm glad you cleared that up for me because I've always felt like that what you just said is the idea. But I appreciate all different approaches to winemaking. I appreciate
mhm,
that old world mentality. But I also appreciate the California way, in Australia and places like that. And thinking about the bulk of your career, you went ahead and went on to Kelly Fleming Wines. And so you were
mhm,
at Kelly Fleming Wines as an assistant winemaker, and then you did become the winemaker. Kelly Fleming created this
mhm,
brand, to my knowledge, back in 1998 to more or
mhm,
less make wines that she loved. This is also, to my knowledge, this is a mostly female run winery.
mhm,
And you had an opportunity to be a part of this brand for many years. And you also had an opportunity to be a part of Francois Péchon and Mike
Yeah.
Wolf, so consulting
Yeah.
winemaker and vineyard manager. And this was incredible too. So when you're thinking about all these different people in all these different places, this is another iconic person and two iconic people, if you will, from the management side of the vineyard that also relates to just people that you want to surround yourself with. So, what was
Yeah.
it like being
Yeah.
at Kelly Fleming and also just getting to learn from these people and be better as a winemaker yourself?
Yeah. So I landed at Kelly Fleming through my connection to Celia Welch at the time because Celia was the winemaker for Kelly, and she also was consulting with Schramsberg. Schramsberg has their J. Davies vineyard, which is their Cabernet vineyard just on the Diamond Mountain property. So I knew of her through that, and she was looking for some full-time kind of cellar help at Kelly's place. And so
Hmm.
I connected with her and started there. So I worked under Celia for about 2 years and then took over as winemaker in 2014. And we were crushing Vine Hill Ranch at Kelly Fleming starting in 20, 2012, I think. And so I already knew Francoise, and then we had a good relationship. And so it was natural for her to come on as consulting winemaker too, because not only was she there making Vine Hill Ranch, but she was also formerly the head winemaker at Arajo Estate, which is
Yeah.
now the Isley Vineyard just down the road. So she was very familiar with that terroir on Pickett Road, east side of
Hmm.
Calistoga. So that was a great fit. And Francoise is a huge mentor
Hmm.
for me. She was, I would say was, but is an incredibly generous person and wants to see these younger people succeed and learn. I've worked with other winemakers who are threatened by your potential and want to keep you in your place.
Yeah.
And she was, for me, that relationship with her is so valuable. And I'm so thankful for having that time to work with her, both from a winemaking perspective, obviously things like blending and picking and all of that, but just also as a human and how to treat other people that you're
Yeah.
working with. She was just a good person and treats everybody with kindness and respect. And that can't be said across this industry. There's
Wow.
a large mix of personalities, but she's one of those incredible people.
That's a perspective that I didn't expect to hear. I think that's an incredible quality that I wish so many people would have. It's unfortunate you say that about when people see your strengths, they look at that as something that they want to deflect. They don't want, a lot of times, unfortunately, people think that when you are really good at what you do, that you're the potential to replace them or to
Right.
outshine them. And it's
Right.
unfortunate because I can tell by you, obviously, we're getting to know each other, but the idea is not really anything other than just focus, keep your head down, do what you love. Your success will find you. You will attract the things that are supposed to come your way. It's never about anybody else. I've always said that I used to think when I was younger that I was trying to compete with other people. And as I
Mhm.
started to get older, I realized that my only competition is myself. And
Absolutely.
I think it's a huge quality. And I can tell like there was something deep within you when you started talking about Francoise. It says so much about her, and I know you would eventually create your own brand in 2014, Mojave Wines. Was she ever personally trying to instigate you to like,
Absolutely.
when I could see this,
Annoyingly.
talk about that.
It was something that I was noodling around in my head for a long time, for I think starting in 2010 or 2011, but just never had the courage to put the pieces together and do it on my own. And she would just continually ask me, "So when are you going to make your own wine? Like, when are you going to do this?" And so it was good. I needed that little bit of a push and a nudge. And I'm not sure I wanted to do it in order to keep my roots to Pinot Noir and
Mhm,
Chardonnay and stay connected to those grapes and these different vineyards along the coastlines.
mhm.
And also just have wines that would have my name on them and really nobody else's. This is something that I created and that I can put on my resume, regardless of where I end up, that these are wines that I made.
Mhm.
So she really pushed me to do that. And I think she also wanted me to see the whole picture, the business side of it as well. Like, how do you put together business plan? Not to say I've really done a great job of that, but how do you put together, understand the cost of goods and margin, and like, how are you going to actually make a profit off of this? So I think she wanted me to understand the bigger picture of running a wide business.
When you started to create Mojave, in your mind, were you like, I want to create it based on experiences, or were you going to take the things that you'd learned over the years and were you going to do it your way? Obviously, do it the way to make really good Pinots out of Sonoma, Santa Cruz, Anderson Valley, and Chardonnays. But at the same time, were you going to rely on some of the things you learned? How was your approach when you started the brand?
I think my approach was definitely relying on things that I had learned from the
Mhm.
places that I've worked. Over time, that's changed. And I think over time, as I've gotten more comfortable as a winemaker, that I started to experiment and do things a little bit differently according to my own style and taste.
Mm.
But that just comes with experience and time. But definitely when I started, it was more like, okay, I know we used to do this.
Yeah.
This is what makes sense. This is what I feel comfortable with.
Mhm.
And there's been bumps along the way and there's been mistakes like we were talking about along the way. I think
Yeah.
one year I did way too much stem inclusion and tried to do native on this beautiful Sonoma County or Sonoma Coast fruit and pretty much bulked it out completely. It was like total loss.
Yeah.
But these things happen and that's how you learn. And now I know I'm not going to try to go native in a macro bin.
Yeah. Would you contribute your success with making your wine more based on hands-on or more from what you learned and you studied in school?
It's a combination, but I think I've really I feel like my knowledge really has come more from a practical standpoint with kind of this backdrop of obviously the science portion from
Mhm.
UC Davis. I feel like I really am more of like an experiential learner. Like I just need to do it. I need to see and feel the whole process. And I feel like that's how I progressed. And then obviously still going back to look at my notes and to look at Davis papers. I think that's helped as well, but it's not like I just came out of Davis and I was like, "Oh, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I got this down." It's not at all. It's like you've come out and you've been taught the basics, but like how much you've actually, what's the word? I don't know, just how much you've actually taken in and then can apply to actual winemaking. I just think
Mhm.
that just takes time to
Yeah.
really understand and have a great sense for it. It might have been different had I been older. Maybe if I had been a graduate student or had been working in wine and then went back to school and got my education, I think that would be a different situation. But just being so young and all of that being pretty brand new to me, for me, it was definitely more hands on learning.
Yeah. So clearly your Mojave Wines pays homage to where you're from. I think that's really cool. The bottles are very pretty too. But when you think about your wines based on today's interview, and this may change, but we'll just talk
Mhm,
about your current releases are. So you have three, you have
mhm,
two Pinots and a Chardonnay. When I look
mhm,
at the two Pinots, the Chardonnay, of course, it's got a lot of acidity, honey,
mhm,
lemon, things like that. But when I look at the two Pinot Noirs, help me understand. I feel like one of them is going to be a little bit more silky, a little bit more
mhm.
polished. This is the one out of the Santa Cruz Mountains, I think. You also
Yes.
have the one out of Anderson Valley, which I think is a little more earthy leather. This is going to be stronger tannins. This would be what I would
Mhm,
imagine as a bigger wine. But describe your
exactly.
wines. What is this the approach that you want to have a lighter Pinot, a bigger Pinot, and of course your Chardonnay? And I know that
Mhm.
when this interview is released, there may be different things online, but we're just talking about
Yeah.
what you have right now.
Yeah. The approach wasn't to create like one bigger style wine and one lighter style wine. It's really to reflect these places.
Hmm.
And we didn't really talk about this, but that was really one of the main things that I took away from my experience working with Francois and from Mike was we want these wines to reflect the vineyard and be the essence of that vineyard and not really have the winemaker be the star of the show. So Anderson Valley, one of my favorite places in California, maybe on earth, just up there in the forest in Mendocino County, not too far from the Mendocino coastline. This is the Wendling Vineyard, which is the deep end of Anderson Valley. So as the crow flies, I think it's only about 7 miles from the coast, but the most northern part of Anderson Valley, and it's up on a hillside facing west towards the coast, towards the ocean. And I think it's just got thinner soils. And so it just naturally is a bit more structural and it's got texture. It's definitely has the most tannin of any Pinot Noir that I've ever worked with,
Yeah.
but not in an overbearing way, like in a very pretty, but also very serious way. Wendling is a serious serious Pinot Noir, a bit more darker in character, a little bit brooding, definitely some forest floor, earthy, mushroomy notes, but
Mhm.
just really pretty. I love that vineyard.
Yeah.
And then Santa Cruz was coming from the Hicks Vineyard. And so that is the south end of the Santa Cruz ABA. So just really outside of the town of Aptos and a little bit outside of Monterey Bay, essentially
Mhm.
in the foothills. And also being so close to the ocean, but I think those soils were a little bit deeper. And so the wine is not quite as structural. It's a little more plush, a little more rounded across the palate, but you get
Right.
these bright raspberry cherry influences, just I think still from that cooling influence off the bay. Still a very
Yeah.
cold site. And then this year, 2022, I'm getting ready to bottle is also Santa Cruz, but it's from a vineyard called Indigo Ridge, which
Okay.
is not too far from, I think, the Reese Alpine Vineyard. So a little higher in elevation, but still very cold, very foresty, just beautiful, incredible concentrated Pinot Noir.
Nice. I know it's funny that Steve Rogstad, he came in. He
Yes.
was in the back of the interview, and I've had Steve on the podcast, and he's up there. He's the winemaker at Brandlin in Mount Veeder. And in 2021, you became the associate winemaker at Brandlin. So you get to work side by
Yeah.
side with such an iconic mountain
Mhm.
Cabernet winemaker. And when I think
Yeah.
about your pretty Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays, and then I think about Mount Veeder, it's just these two totally different worlds. So I
Mm.
have a couple of questions. How cool is it to work with Steve? Steve's been on the podcast, and
Yeah.
it's great to see him. I beamed up when I saw him, so that I feel like he planned that. No, but then
Yeah.
also Brandlin has such a rich history. I think they're only a couple of years or a few years away from 100 years. They have some
Hmm.
vines that have been
Hmm.
planted back into the 1920s. So talk about the history of Brandlin and what inspired you to work parallel to Mojave, but like I said, two totally different worlds.
Yeah. Okay. So number one, working with Steve is great. He is such a seasoned winemaker and he's been here with Cubizon and Brandlin for I think 20, I think we're at 20 years. So I just feel like he's so dialed in and it all just comes really naturally with him. And he's also just super chill. So he's a great person to
Yeah,
work
he's a cool
with.
dude.
Yeah, and I've learned a lot working here. I'm associate winemaker for Brandlin, but I've also participated in everything Cubizon. And so that ends up being Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc and Syrah, like all from this Carneros estate vineyard, which has really broadened my scope of wines that I work with, which is
Mhm.
great. And then the Brandlin site is just a truly special place. I knew about Mount Veeder before. I'd been to Mayacamas, I'd been to Progeny. I thought it was a really interesting place. But for me, Brandlin just combines this incredible Cabernet vineyard, this high mountaintop. So Brandlin's about 1,200 feet in elevation, but just also with this rich history of Napa Valley. So a lot of the German and Swiss immigrants came in the late 1800s and settled on Mount Veeder, which I can only assume is because it reminded them of home.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's still a rugged place. It's not an easy place to get around or build something or plant a vineyard. It's not an easy place to do that. So, but the Brandlin estate, Henry Brandlin came over late 1800s, like you were saying, planted that vineyard in 1926. So it was 10 acres of old vine, head trains, and Fidel, not irrigated. That is still there. And then the Cuvazon owners took it on in the late 90s and were able to keep the Brandlin name, but then expanded the property to about 50 acres of Cabernet and then a little bit of Cabernet Franc, Malbec, and Petit Verdot. And it is obviously incredibly different from Pinot Noir in style, but
Mhm.
in a way it's similar because these are grapes that have so much concentration in tannin and in color that you actually have to be careful with them in the fermenter. So it seems like it would be different from Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir, it definitely take a more delicate approach and really try to respect that fruit and not overdo it like in ripeness or barrel use. But
Mhm.
in a way, this mountain Cabernet is a somewhat similar approach in that it's easy to overdo it. It's because there's so much tannin naturally there. If
Yeah.
you pump over too much or if you heat it up too much, you will over extract those tannins and end up with these incredibly rough wines. So
Yeah.
in a way it's similar. Like they are this it's almost a similar approach in some ways. And I also just love also being in the mountains, in the forest. I just love the place itself.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think it's great that it's funny too, because I know I mentioned this earlier, like you, you found yourself approaching challenging situations. It almost would seem challenging from an outsider looking in. Oh, wow, she's trying to go up to Mount Veeder and they're confident in you, right? They're confident in who you are, what you've done over the years and all the things that you're
Mhm.
doing. But just to see you doing that, it's almost like you're just this kid at heart that has no fear and you're just going out. And I think it's really great that you get to work alongside Steve. We could talk about him all day. He's a super cool guy and getting to work with somebody that's chill, like you mentioned,
Mhm.
that's a huge thing. Somebody that obviously feels the pressure, but you
Mhm.
would never know because he's just so in the zone. He's so into what he's doing after all these years. And
Yeah.
I think it's really cool. I wanted to go ahead and talk about a couple of awards or a couple of
Mhm.
mentions that you've
Mhm.
received. So in 2019, you were regarded as the Emerging Winemaker of the Year. And Antonio Galani said you are one of the most talented winemakers of your generation. So talk about that. What does that mean? What these recognitions, obviously, some people they say, it's whatever, and they move on. I
Mhm.
feel like to some degree, this must mean so much to you or to anybody because there is something to be said about somebody like yourself or somebody else that is getting honored in certain ways. So what is it? How does it feel to know that you're being recognized like that?
No, it's huge. That was really an incredible honor and totally unexpected. I think at the time it was probably because we helped put Kelly Fleming a little more on the map in terms of the
Mhm.
wines. Maybe we really worked on getting those wines up to a certain level, which just it's funny because Calistoga is like completely different from Mount Veeder and you have to treat the wines in a completely different way. And
Yeah,
we worked them pretty hard. But no, it's an incredible honor to be recognized because you do work so hard, especially throughout or with everything, throughout harvest, throughout blending. So to actually to have somebody call you out and give you props for all the work you put into it is it's huge.
yeah, that's
I feel like I
amazing.
must be still an emerging winemaker, but but it was that was very nice.
Obviously, you will eventually become winemaker of the year for different
Mhm.
articles. I can see San Francisco Chronicle naming you winemaker of the year, Food and Wine magazine winemaker of the year. Like I believe it. It's true because you're the kind of person that's going to put yourself in that position. And this is what I've been talking about since the beginning of the podcast is you have intentionally put yourself in the position and you're bashful about that. And you're like, but it's true. I don't think that like looking back on your journey, that there's been a couple of things that didn't exactly go as you planned. Your intention wasn't necessarily wrote out in class. But at the end of the day, a person that receives mentions like that, or a person that I say that I think you're going to be the winemaker of the year eventually soon, those are mentions or awards that are intended for people who have an intention to go out and really crush it and get what they want and do amazing. And that's you. And that's one of the things I feel like I'm in the beginning or the middle. I would say the middle of this
Mhm.
huge, massive success of Rebecca George. One day I'm going to be like, yeah, I got to interview her and it was really cool because she was like flying high and she was doing her thing. And then you're going to have these winemakers of the year and they're going to be talking about you in such insane ways. And I think that says a lot about you and just like the path that you've chosen. I think that it's for people like that and you're going to be that one day.
Thank you. I'm gonna go like record this little portion of the podcast and just listen to it. Start
Let it
listen
meditate
to
on
it
it.
over and over. Yeah, just meditate on it and let it sink in. But no, I really appreciate you saying that. And yeah, we'll see. Time will tell.
Yeah.
It's exciting. There's plenty of opportunities in the future, and like you said, it's never too late. Mhm.
One of my last questions is going back to Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is like we talked about earlier. It's a very hard varietal to make. It's a very challenging varietal to make, but you do it so great. And I'm just curious, is there a misconception about making Pinot? Is it just one of those varietals that you just have to go in there? You know what you need to do and you have to be patient with it. Do you have a key ingredient that you have learned over time that it's really not as difficult? What is it about you that it's comes so natural to make just incredible Pinot Noir?
I feel like maybe there is a little bit of a misconception about Pinot Noir being challenging. I think from the farming perspective is really where it's more challenging because it
Mhm.
is like a tighter cluster, more prone to mildew. There's just a bit more um, hands-on approach where you just have to be really on top of it and really careful with Pinot. And really the same goes for Chardonnay. But as far as once you get it into the winery, I don't think it's that challenging. I do think that it's more sensitive in a way. Like I've noticed over the years that something as small as racking it once during the aging period or adding sulfur, it feels way more reactive. Like you'll notice the differences just with small procedural things. Whereas with Cabernet or even Chardonnay, it's like, those are just really sturdy wines that you can move around or just that you can move around and adjust and you don't really notice any of these major changes. You do something to Pinot and it just seems very reactive.
Yeah.
I don't find it to be terribly difficult other than it just amplifies any little thing that you do.
Yeah, and Pinot is very much of place. Would you say that Pinot Noir really represents place more than anything when it comes to wine?
For me, definitely. And I think I always say Pinot Noir wears its appellation on its sleeve. I just think it really displays where it's coming from and where it's grown. Like I'm sure you do as well. Pinot Noirs from Oregon taste like they're from Oregon. Pinot
Mhm.
Noirs for me from Santa Cruz taste like Santa Cruz. Same goes for Santa Rita and the Central Coast. Like those are very, they just have a very specific aromatic and flavor profile.
Mhm.
And it's one of the reasons I love Pinot. And I love that all the clones are different. The clones you can tell just by looking at them and then tasting them how different they are. And I think that's why people geek out about Pinot Noir clones. You don't get the same excitement necessarily with like Cabernet clones
Yeah.
or like Merlot clones.
Yeah.
Um, because I think those differences are more subtle in things like Cabernet versus
Yeah.
Pinot Noir. It's pretty, they are so different. And those are fun things to work with, fun things to blend with. It just gives you a great portfolio of wines
Nice.
when you can work with like a field blend or having different clones.
Yeah, I love the personality aspect of Pinot Noir, and Pinot Noir, as I've gotten older, has become a wine that I'm more personally intrigued about. I am that Cabernet guy. I have been getting into a lot of GSMs. I am really getting into
Okay.
the Rhone blends, and I think my
Cool.
heart is old world at the end of the day. I
Yeah.
think that's really where I'm at.
Yeah.
But the Pinot Noirs have started to tug at me a little bit, but it is
Hmm.
interesting when you talk about the clones, and you do find this very vast and very specific personality trait for different places or different clones, and I'll always love a nice big cab, but I think a
Hmm.
true experience is found in a very specific Pinot Noir from a very specific place, and hopefully
Hmm.
for those that are listening, from a very specific winemaker like Rebecca Jordan.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, how can
Yeah.
people learn about you more? How can they find you online, your website, social
Yeah.
media? How can they learn more about
Yeah.
Brandlin? Share that with us.
Yeah. So my website is mojavewines.com, very straightforward. And then yes, Instagram and Facebook handle is also at Mojave Wines. And then Brandlin is very simple as well. It's brandlinwines.com.
So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and add all that to the show notes so people that are listening can go ahead and click and they'll find everything that they need to learn more about you and get some wines. And so I'm really excited about that. But my last question for you today as we close up is it's looking back on, I want to say like the last 20 years of your career in wine. And when you look at where you are now, you have so many things that you can reflect on, that you can look at and be proud of. Even some of the failures that you can think about in your mind that you know you were able to learn so much from. But let's say 20 years from now, you're talking with somebody, you're doing a podcast, you got about 3 or 4 winemakers of the year under your belt. And somebody's asking you, what was it about the last 20 years? So between now and 20 years from now that you're really excited that you got to accomplish? Or what's one of the things that you're really proud of that maybe for you right now you haven't gotten to accomplish yet? What would that be?
Actually, I'll throw you a little curveball. I am becoming more and more interested in this kind of low alcohol, non-alcohol movement. I think just as I am getting older and focusing more on my health, like I'm seeking out wines that are lower in alcohol. So I'm actually curious. I'm not saying that this is like my overall but in terms of something that I haven't done yet that I'm interested in exploring
Mhm.
is something is exploring the low alcohol front and
Yeah.
seeing if it's possible to make great wines that have lower ABV.
It's actually really cool. So I work in a restaurant. I'm a sommelier.
Mm,
And I'm noticing that a lot of people are saying that they don't drink or that they're not
mhm,
drinking. Maybe they won't tell me
mhm,
that they don't drink, but they make it seem like, "Oh, no, we're not gonna have anything to drink tonight." And sometimes I'm starting to think now it's
mhm,
intentional, but
mhm.
a lot of people are doing mocktails. And
Right,
so
right.
I'll say, "Oh, any of our specialty cocktails, it'll be mainly tonic or soda water driven, fresh fruit.
Mhm,
We can do a bartender choice and they can what's something that you like? Do you like mint, cucumber? Do you like lychee?"
mhm,
We can go from there. But this whole either low alcohol or no alcohol, it's becoming very
mhm,
popular, and I don't know if it's becoming popular in our generation or
mhm.
in this generation, but would you agree? Is that just something that I'm seeing, or are you starting to notice that as well?
No, I'm seeing it everywhere because I do travel a lot for Brandlin across the country to do marketing stuff, and I've certainly noticed in a lot of the major cities in big restaurants that you're seeing NA options on the menu, whether it's cocktails or wine or beer as well.
Mhm.
But there are more options. So I think it's probably just a little bit of a pushback or a swing back from the pandemic when people were overdoing it on
Yeah,
alcohol at
that's
home.
actually true.
And so it's partly that, but I also do think it's the younger generation being less, I guess, just less interested in alcohol in general, living a more healthy lifestyle. But I think for me personally, it's I would just to have an option of something that tastes good, that isn't sugary and isn't sweet, that actually is a very nice product that is still feels like a treat, but
Mhm.
that doesn't give me a hangover the next day.
Yeah, I call those dumb hangovers, and I call them that because I'll wake up, I'll have this little thing in my head, and I'm like, "Great,
Right,
how long am I gonna have to
right,
deal with this today?" And I can go through the day and
right,
you'll never
right,
know. And I'm just trying to, like,
right.
get what's one night, a couple came in, and they brought a bottle of wine, and I go to look at the wine, I'm like, "Oh," I didn't recognize it. It was no alcohol. When you said what you said, I thought to myself about them because they brought in a basically like a non-alcoholic bottle of wine that looked like a Chardonnay. It had all the color. It was like a Pinot Grigio or a Chardonnay or something to that effect, but it
Mhm.
was no alcohol. And so between mocktails and all these different ways that people are finding a way to drink non-alcoholic drinks, I thought it was interesting to have a bottle of wine on the table. I couldn't charge him a corking fee. I was like, don't, I'm not,
I can't
I
do
was like,
it.
"I'm not gonna
Yeah,
do that. I'm not gonna do
yeah.
that." But yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad to hear it's definitely something that's not just happening around me.
No, I think it's happening across the country. The challenge is finding ones that are nice. It seems like the only ones so far that I've tasted that are pretty decent are Riesling versions of
Oh, yeah.
NA wine.
But
Yeah.
I feel like it's easier to make a non-alcoholic Riesling or a non-alcoholic
Mhm.
Moscato because
Right.
you slam it with sugar. You know
And that's also I also still don't want to drink a bunch of sugar. So
Yeah, that's the thing, though. I didn't try the non-alcoholic wine, but I thought to myself, I'm looking at there's nutrition facts on the back of this bottle of wine, and I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm trying to get my head around
Yeah.
is
Anyway.
this a play? So, Rebecca, I just want to tell you, it has been a great conversation today. We were able to talk about some personal things and talk about like examples of things that I've gone through and share some of the things that motivated you. And I'm excited because I feel like you're such a relatable person that people that are listening can totally relate to the things that you've gone through. We've all gone through similar things in our life to get us to where we are today. And like I said in the beginning of the interview, I think anybody that's listening, you're giving them permission to follow a path, whether it's very specific or not. Of course, the things that you did led you to where you are today as far as the wines that you make. But hearing your story, hearing about how you just were never you had this no fear mentality and you just found yourself in all these epic places around these epic people, I think that gives people permission as well to not worry, not care, just go out there and don't get in your head. Don't worry about if you're it's like this whole mentality like you're on a stage and everybody's watching you. Just forget about the whole scene and just do good at what you do or just follow what you do. And so I just want to thank you. Thanks to Roy Piper Thank
Yeah.
you so much. It's been an honor to have you here today on the podcast.
No, thank you so much. It's been an honor to chat with you. And thank you for doing such a deep dive on my history. I don't think anybody has known as much information as you have. That's much appreciated. And yeah, I would say for anybody listening, just go for it and just try things out. There's nothing stopping you. It doesn't mean you have to do these things for the rest of your life, but give it a shot and see what it feels like.